So I would like to welcome everyone to our first invited guest workshop after the break. We have not seen each other. Well, some of us have seen each other, but for over a month. It's this time of the semester, as evidenced by the attendance, which is great. However, today we are welcoming Dr. Fernando Rubio, and I will do a quick introduction. I'll start with questions. What levels of proficiency do students learning languages at the post-secondary level typically attain? What types of proficiency do students attain after specific learning sequences? What extracurricular experiences have the most positive effect on acquisition? It is these and then other questions of language proficiency attainment that today's talk will address. Our guest, Dr. Fernando Rubio, will also point out the implications, the answers to these questions have for foreign language programs. Dr. Rubio is a professor of Spanish linguistics at the University of Utah, pretty far away, much better climate, where he is the director of online curriculum enhancement and innovation. But he's also the director of the Title VI National Language Center, Resource Center at the University of Utah. From 2014 to 2018, he was principal investigator in the Language Flagship Proficiency Initiative grant. And since 2013, he has been co-principal investigator in the Department of Defense Utah Language Teaching Center. He is the author of 2 textbooks, and the names are in Spanish. I do not speak Spanish, so I will skip the titles. They're both, the first one was published in 2009, and the other one in 2012. He has also authored numerous articles and book chapters on issues related to second language acquisition, assessment, and technology-enhanced language learning and teaching. His research interests are in the areas of applied linguistics and teaching methodologies, including technology-enhanced language learning and teaching. Allow me to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Fernando Rubio.
Thank you, Simon, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. So yeah, I'm going to talk about proficiency, but I wanted to start by asking you how much you know about language proficiency. How familiar are you with, particularly with the ACTFL guidelines? Yes, very familiar?
Generally.
Great. That'll help that. Okay, so if you were king or queen of your language program and you got to decide what the goals of your program are, can you read that? Is that too small?
No.
Okay. So imagine that you are writing the goals, proficiency goals for your program. Which of those statements would you choose?
Are they all different? Are they parallel?
No, they're all mixed.
They're all
Yeah, to make it more
challenging.
So some of those you may find too basic.
Particular skill approaches across
Across the board. Some you may find too basic, some maybe too ambitious, and some may be right. Think about a full language program, not the courses that you teach, but the entire program. Someone who graduates with a degree in the language that you teach. What would you want that person to be able to do?
But it's at one level. Some places they only 3 courses, some universities have only 3 beginners, 2 beginners course and 1 intermediate, others at 2 years and others at 3 years.
Imagine that in your program you offer a full major.
A full major.
And you want to rate the goals for that major program.
So this writers can reproduce practice material that's an elementary level, I would say, the third on the left.
The third on the left? The right.
The right.
You mean the
I'm
right?
sorry, I didn't do
Okay.
the military.
So that's too basic, you think?
No.
No, that's
so
right.
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought our task now was to identify what each description corresponds, what level of knowledge of the language.
No, tell me what you would want if a student.
Oh, I
that-
see it,
What
yeah.
language do you teach? Italian?
Italian.
Italian. Imagine that someone who graduates with a degree in Italian.
Hmm.
What would you want to say
So-
you're able to do?
One fulfills the requirement.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I want 9.
You want number 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
The
9.
last one on the right.
They can present clearly articulated, coherent, and detailed narrations on complex
Yeah.
abstract issues
That's
and hypothetical
advanced.
issues.
No,
I want that too.
Yeah, that's
not
beyond
with the number of others we have.
This is advanced.
I think that many of these are good, but I think we should probably exclude number 2. They can suspend judgment, adapt their language, and make it more critical. I think that might be a little.
That's,
All right.
I would love that too.
That's
That's
Let's exclude that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's,
How about 9? Are we all okay with 9 as a goal?
I think for a major, yeah. I
Yes.
think for a major,
I
that's
agree with
real.
him.
Okay.
It's an advanced task.
It's actually a superior
Yeah,
level.
it's a
It's a
proficiency.
superior level proficiency. So it's
Yeah.
beyond advanced.
Beyond advanced.
And so is 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those of you who are familiar with the ACT4 guidelines, what level in the ACT4 guidelines do you think that a major should aspire to?
Advanced.
Advanced.
Advanced is,
Advanced?
It depends on the language, on the level of
Yeah.
difficulty.
Okay, it depends on the level of difficulty of the language.
Intermediate high.
Intermediate high to advanced? Okay.
that's-
Okay, that's great to frame my presentation. Okay, so keep that in mind. You're all familiar with those, so I'm not going to stop you. And you're all familiar with, we just mentioned the level, different categories, levels of difficulty of different languages, and you all know what category the language that you teach falls under, whether it's category 1, 2, or 3, or 4. And there's this literature about the number of hours of instruction that it takes to reach a certain level, depending on the difficulty for English speakers, right? So it's about 240 hours for the easiest languages, typically the Romance languages and a couple more. Double that for category 2, like Russian or Turkish. Even longer for category 3.
But was there a difference perhaps by the Department of Defense that had 4 categories?
Yeah, that's that. Yes.
But this is only 3 categories.
Well, there's a category 4 as well. Yeah.
Because the one I had Slavic languages coming in category 3 and like
Correct. Yeah.
there was
So
an intermediate
category 2
2.
should be there's an
There's
intermediate 2
German,
and there's German.
maybe.
Yes. Yeah. So I probably collapsed the 1 and the 2.
The 1 and 2.
So that what you call the 3 is my 2, and what you call the 4 is my 3. But anyway, so the idea is that it takes a significant amount of time to reach relatively high level of proficiency, and a typical university program does not give you enough time, right? So if you think about the courses that you teach, they're probably somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a week, right? And if you think about a typical semester, 15 weeks or so, so that's 30 weeks per year. You do the math, and what you get in a year is, in 2 years, is typically between 180 and 300 hours of instruction. There's a language requirement here in Colombia, correct?
Yeah.
And it's what, 2 years?
2 years.
2 years, yeah. So that's what we have too at the University of Utah. That's the most typical language requirement. So that normally gives you somewhere in that range, 180 to 300 hours of instruction in 2 years. So if you're learning a category 1 language, then if you're lucky, you do get to the level the number of hours that you need to reach the intermediate level. Beyond category 1, forget it, you're not even close. So here's the reality. What happens? What can we do? Oh, yes.
Do we include home assignment, work at home?
Yeah,
into these
well,
hours?
yes, yeah.
Because it's, they will
Right.
approximately can double it.
Although I'm going to talk about homework in a minute.
But is there
And keep in mind-
level, what do you mean with intermediate levels?
In the actual scale.
That's full scale.
Yeah, yeah. And keep in mind that this, I mean, I'm not aware of any kind of empirical research that has been done on this classification. It was done by the Foreign Service Institute, military students, highly motivated adults. Many of them speak a second or a third language already. This is all they do. They learn language. They don't have to. You don't have to worry about them, studying for biology or chemistry or philosophy or anything else. They're learning Russian, and that's what they do. Small classes, so it's not your typical undergraduates. It's likely that your typical undergraduate would need more time than what this study found. But anyway, so that's the reality. We don't have them in the classroom long enough to get them where we want them to be. All right. So I'm going to start by giving you a quick overview of some of the research that has been done in terms of levels of proficiency that university students reach. And I'm going to talk a little bit about study abroad, a little bit about research that has been done on majors and other students, and also briefly about teacher certification. So there's a lot of research on the effect of study abroad. And in general, we know that students who go abroad make proficiency gains, typically as expected. If you think about the inverted pyramid in the actual scale, when you start at a lower level, you grow faster than you do when you start at a higher level. We also know that typically students in the less commonly taught languages start at lower levels and therefore don't reach as high levels as students in more commonly taught languages. It's also true that when we look at semester-long study abroad, which happens to be the most common variety now, it's a very small window of time to really be able to measure much growth, right? Language learning takes long, and in one semester, the amount of progress that you make is sometimes, it doesn't register in a rough scale like the actual scale. It's also hard to compare. There are a lot of studies out there of study abroad, but it's hard to compare from study to study because there are so many factors that may affect what you learn when you're in a study abroad situation that it's hard to compare one program with another. We know that students who do go abroad for a year make greater gains, obviously, typically one full level in a year. But we know, as I said, that that's less and less common for students to go away for such a long time. The main study that I'm going to refer to today was John Carroll, published in 1967, data collected in the mid-60s, so before any of you were born, right? It's an interesting study because it is replicable in many ways. He used a fairly large sample of students across the country at a variety of types of institutions, and he studied majors. So students who were majoring in those languages which happened to be the most common language majors at the time. And that tells you something. If you look at that list and you compare it to the landscape today, you'll see that there are languages there that are not that common today, and languages that are very common today that were not even, didn't even make the list back then. So he looked at French, Spanish, German, Italian, and Russian majors, and that was the order of the number of majors. So French was the number one foreign language in the 60s in the United States, followed by Spanish and German, that were very close, and then at a distance, Italian and Russian. And Carroll looked at speaking, listening, reading, and writing, all four skills. And he used proficiency tests. Of course, the proficiency tests that we have today did not exist back then. In fact, the actual guidelines didn't exist back then. He also used a background questionnaire. So when students took the test, they also had to respond to certain questions that he then used to correlate with the proficiency results, and an aptitude test. And in general, he found that study abroad, heritage status, and an early start were very strong predictors of success, of ultimate level of proficiency. I'm going to refer back to this study a couple of times because what I'm going to describe today is similar to what Carol did 50 years ago. More recently, my colleague Erwin Schirner from the University of Leipzig in Germany did a study. He focused on reading and listening, where he looked at over 3,000 students in those languages, French, German, Italian, Japanese, and Spanish. Again, reading and listening. And he looked at them at different points of instruction. Instead of just looking at majors like Carol did, he looked at students at the end of what's the typical language requirements, so 2 years of instruction, and then right before graduation. And what he found was that at graduation, many students are not at the advanced level. And when they are, they reach the advanced level in reading, but not necessarily in listening. And he saw that after 4 semesters of instruction, many students are still at novice, which confirms the previous slide where we looked at the number of hours that are needed to reach the intermediate level. If we don't give them enough time in 4 semesters, they're not likely to reach the intermediate level, so they're still at their novice level. And when they do reach the intermediate level, that is more common in languages like French and Spanish than it is in a language like Japanese, for example. Okay? But interestingly, he saw that reading is the skill that is within reach of the advanced level at the time of graduation. Listening falls behind. I'm going to go back to that finding in a minute. And finally, teacher certification. I want to briefly talk about teacher certification because there's a lot of data on students who major in a language and then want to get certified as teachers because they do have to pass a proficiency exam, so we know what level of proficiency they have. Right? And we know that, well, typically when they have to pass a proficiency test, it's just speaking and writing. And states require certain levels of proficiency to give someone the teaching credentials. And it varies by state and it varies by language. So typically, the most typical requirement for the commonly taught languages is the advanced low. So the bare minimum at the advanced level. And in some of the less commonly taught languages, intermediate high is the required level of proficiency. Elvira Zender from ACTFL did a study back in 2003 looking at OPIs, so oral proficiency interviews, of teacher candidates in a variety of languages, and what she found was that they were typically in the intermediate high to advanced low range. So not quite advanced on average. So what I'm going to talk about today is an initiative funded by the Language Flagship, where we looked at levels of proficiency of students in a number of languages at different levels of instruction in post-secondary education. So I wanted to talk about the Language Flagship briefly because I don't know how familiar you may be with the Language Flagship. No, not familiar? No? Okay, great. The Language Flagship is an initiative of the Department of Defense where they partner with universities with the goal of graduating global professionals that have high levels of proficiency, at least advanced or beyond. So what the Language Flagship does is it selects language programs at universities in the United States and gives them funding to facilitate building capacity in critical languages, those languages that are listed there. So the language program at a university, say in Arabic, will provide a pathway for students who come into the university with no knowledge of Arabic, or some knowledge of Arabic, to graduate in any field and also get to the advanced or superior level in Arabic. And in order to do that, they develop sometimes innovative models of instruction and pedagogies and curricular models that facilitate reaching those higher levels. There are currently 31 programs at 21 institutions. Those are the languages that are included in the Flagship Initiative. And this has been around for...
I think one language is not there. Swahili has been included.
Swahili, right, yes. I'm actually going to be working with some Swahili teachers in a couple of weeks. So yeah, it should be there. So the language, this program has been around for quite a few years. And back in 2014, the Language Flagship decided that it would be important for them to get an idea, an overall idea of what levels of proficiency students reach at universities in general, in regular language programs, not flagship programs, but regular language programs in the United States. So there was a request for proposals back in 2014, and 3 universities were awarded this grant. The University of Utah, my own institution, the University of Minnesota, and Michigan State University. So those are the 3 universities and the people involved in the Flagship Proficiency Initiative. The mandate from the Language Flagship was for us to gather as much proficiency data as possible of students in a variety of languages at all levels of instruction, and then look at what happens in the curriculum that may be connected with successes or lack of success in those programs, document what we find, and then share it with others. So I guess what I'm doing today is this third bullet point. I'm sharing it with you. This is a little bit of background on the 3 institutions that participated in the Proficiency Initiative, the languages that we worked with, and the number of tests that we administered in that 3-year period. The last year we dedicated to gathering the data and building a huge database. As you can see, there are over 20,000 tests administered, so it's a fairly large database of proficiency data. You can see the languages that we looked at. There's a little bit of overlap in terms of the languages, although not everyone, we didn't all do the same languages. And there's a significant range in terms of the number of tests that we administered. It has to do with the languages that we covered. So at the University of Utah, we chose not to do the more common languages, so we didn't do Spanish or French, and our numbers are logically smaller than, say, Michigan State that did French and Spanish, for example. And our mandate was to gather proficiency data for speaking, reading, and listening. Okay, so we used the OPIC for speaking, which is the computerized version of the OPI. And then ACTFL is very creative when it comes to naming tests. So there's the RPT for reading proficiency test. There's the LPT for listening proficiency test. There's the WPT for writing proficiency test. Okay. We didn't do writing. The granting agency didn't want us to do writing, and we're glad that we didn't have to do writing because it takes a long time. We gave students these 3 tests for free, and the students, after taking the test, would get an official ACTFL rating of their proficiency for free. We thought they're going to be so excited about this because they will graduate and have something that they can show to their prospective employers and say, look, I speak Korean. I have an official certificate that shows that, and it's free. I didn't have to spend $300 to pay for that. It's free. So they will all be dying to take these tests. No, the reality is that it was like pulling teeth. We actually had to raffle iPads just to get students to come to the lab and take the test. And even with that, it was really a struggle. So we're glad that we didn't have to do writing as well, because it would have been a nightmare. Anyway, so speaking, reading, and listening. all those languages, a lot of tests. So I'm going to show you briefly an overall view of the findings, of the results. So you have an idea of where students are at the different levels in each of the 3 scales. Here's a quick overview of the number of tests that we administered. We tested students at the end of first year, the end of second year, the end of third year, and then the semester before graduation. Okay? And you see that there are some languages that were not included, like Japanese, for example, is not one of the languages that we did, but I think for all 3 institutions, the language programs that were not included in the grant often said, oh, we want our students tested as well, so we will find funding and pay for it, and can you have our students in X language tested? So we did. So we added a few more, but not big numbers, as you can see. So a total of about 9,000 students tested in 3 tests, if they took all 3. As I said, that was not always the case. And again, at the end of first, second, third, fourth year, the idea was to see how their level of proficiency progresses over time. So I'm going to show you first cross-sectional data. So again, cross-sectional meaning I'll show you a cross-section of where students are in first, second, third, and fourth year. They're not the same students. It's one-time testing of students at different levels. So this is for speaking. I'll give you a few seconds to look at the colors and find the language that you're interested in, and see if you see anything that looks surprising to you.
Actually, Portuguese and Russian just took their foot off the gas.
Between third and fourth year, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so there are answers to some of the questions that you may have. I have an answer for that one. Portuguese and Russian were 2 of the languages that we tested at the University of Utah. We have a somewhat unusual student population, particularly at the higher levels, because, as you may know, a significant percentage of the population in Utah serve a religious mission abroad. So young people go abroad to Russia or Brazil for a couple of years, and then they come back and enroll at the university, and because they already have proficiency in a language, they often want to take that language at a high level. And what they do is, there's a course that's specifically designed for them at the 3rd year level. They take that course. If they pass it with a certain grade, they can buy the credits for all the lower level courses. So they come to the University of Utah, they enroll in this 3rd year course, they pass it, they buy the credits for 1st and 2nd year, and then they go. They disappear. So we never see them again. So our 3rd year courses are mostly populated with those students. Very few of them continue on to a full major. So when you look at the 4th year courses, we may have some of those students, but we also have regular students that went through our program that didn't have 2 years of experience abroad. So that explains the dip in proficiency between 3rd and 4th year. Also, I found out later that at the University at Michigan State, in Russian in particular, the students who are in 4th year are the ones who typically don't go abroad. The ones who go abroad after 3rd year, and they complete the requirements abroad, so they are not in the 4th year courses typically. Okay, so again, that it's a slightly different population. Yes?
I was surprised to see that Spanish, for example, is near the middle of the pack, near the bottom, closer to the bottom, whereas it appears to be German, I think, which is the highest one at the end, is, which is a more difficult language to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And Japanese.
And Japanese. Look at Japanese up there. Yeah.
I was wondering why I think that is.
Speaking, remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first year is not counted in those 2 languages?
I'm sorry?
Why isn't the first year count for Japanese and
Oh, because the numbers were not large
Oh,
enough
I
to
see.
be included there. Remember that in Japanese, the total number of students that were tested in Japanese was like 50 or so. So there were probably not enough first-year students to be counted here. And same thing in German.
Maybe it's more of a self-selecting group.
That's one of the things, right? So the student population in some of the harder languages is significantly different in many ways from the student population in French or Spanish. So that may be one reason that may explain the differences there. There are pedagogical differences between languages as well. Sometimes very significant pedagogical differences between languages that may explain some of the findings. How do you explain the fact that at the end of first year there's such a big spread here? After year one, you have students in Portuguese that are approaching intermediate mid, and then the majority of the rest are at the novice high level. Why is that? What do you think?
Contact hours?
Huh?
Contact hours?
They're the same. Heritage may be one of them, but not necessarily Portuguese-speaking heritage.
I think that what surprises me even more is the difference between Portuguese and Spanish
Yeah.
at the first year.
Yes.
So
Okay.
that's,
So the main reason for the difference between Portuguese and the rest, in particular between Portuguese up here and Spanish up here,
Brazil, so the students.
is that there are a lot of Spanish speakers enrolled in first year Portuguese, and
so that's.
it's really the same language.
Yeah.
It's the same language, really. So they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be in first year. So when they let them enroll in a first year course in Portuguese, if they already speak Spanish, they breeze through it. And of course, at the end of the first year, they can speak. They can do what intermediate level speakers do. They may be using Spanish half of the time, but they qualify as intermediate. They qualify as intermediate speakers, so they're up there.
So you didn't there is no differentiation, there is no difference between true beginners and beginners with the
really-
background knowledge of the same, as like in Slavic languages, Russian, and people who
Right.
know
Yeah.
other Slavic languages, they will be tested at a different category.
Right. And you can do that if you know who they are. But here you have a lot of students who are not heritage speakers. They're English speakers, but they had 4 or 5 years of Spanish in middle and high school, and they come to the university and you ask them, have you ever had Portuguese before? And they no. Okay, you go to first semester Portuguese, and they love it.
So did you get this information from their background knowledge?
Yes.
Or list
Yeah.
information?
So what about the Korean?
What about Korean? Where's Korean? Okay, Korean.
Yeah.
Korean is one of the languages that we did at the University of Utah, so I can talk about that. Our Korean program is different in a good way, in the sense that it's a relatively small program that works very well together. They all participate in everything. Everybody who teaches in the Korean program participates in curricular decisions. They share everything they do with everyone else. They went through, the first year that we did the testing, they were very interested in learning about the level of proficiency of their students. I had many sessions with them where I sat down with them and looked at their syllabi, their assessments. We discussed what kinds of changes they would need to implement in order to make sure that their assessment were really proficiency based and their teaching was really proficiency based. So they're really invested in the level of proficiency of the students and facilitating growth and proficiency, and that shows really, because it's a really difficult language, and they're doing very well. And I think it's because they really work very well together, and they articulate very well from first to second to third to fourth year. Yes.
I'm interested in the flattening of the curve in the Chinese between third and fourth year.
Yes.
Is it due to speaking speaking Chinese gets more difficult in fourth year? Or is it that traditional, we're now going into literature slash, courses where writing becomes more important and they just don't speak anymore?
I was going to talk about that. You're absolutely right. That's a big part of it. So there are two things there. You'll see, so this is speaking, but I'm going to show you reading and listening in a minute, and you'll see that after third year, when you ignore the noise, the fact that at Utah we have special students in third year and all that, when you look at the trend, you'll see that typically there's a flattening of the curve between third and fourth year. There are two things. One is that if you, going back to the inverted pyramid in ACTFL, if you think about the idea of proficiency, the higher you go, the slower the growth, right? The more there is to learn to get to the next level. So the way ACTFL measures proficiency, that's expected. As you go higher, your rate of progress will slow down. So you will see that curve flattening out. And the other thing is that typically what happens in upper level courses, the focus goes to reading and not so much speaking. So you'll see that the reading results are okay. They're what you would expect, but the speaking and the listening are not there. And that may have a lot to do with the curriculum and the fact that at the higher levels, we somehow assume that students already know how to speak, and we give them a lot of reading practice, but they don't necessarily get to speak much. Okay? So that's speaking. Reading. Similar in many ways to what you saw in speaking.
But Russian is the same curve.
Russian again,
I
same
think
thing.
this is,
Yeah.
So they don't.
I think this
Same
is a
thing.
different, this is a particular group of learners at the university. You spoke about missionaries who do not continue, and
But
that's
remember, this
very
is-
unique.
But that's only a small portion of the pie. If you think about the number of tests that we administered at the University of Utah, we were in the 2000s. Michigan State, over 14,000. They don't have Michigan. But yes, in Russian, we did, at the University of Utah, that's one of the languages that we did, and it affects the Russian numbers. Our population affects the Russian numbers. And the Portuguese numbers as well. That are there, so. But look at where they get in reading. They approach or get to the advanced low. Compared to speaking, this is advanced low, this is intermediate mid. They're not there yet. So in reading, they're getting to higher levels. How about this jump that we see between second and third year? And that's the case in speaking as well. What do you attribute that to? Yes.
Well, I know a lot of language courses, just the level of reading just goes up. That's when students spend a lot of time with a dictionary, they just have to build the vocabulary on a huge scale.
And there's more focus on reading when you get to third year, right?
And
There's also-
now the demographics regards people who are taking a course not because they have
Exactly.
to, and so the
That's a
level of motivation, effective level.
Very important point. Second year is the end of the language requirement at all three institutions. So the students who are populating these courses, the majority of them are there because they have to, not because they want to. The students after this point, these are the students who want to continue taking the language. So their level of motivation is clearly different, and that affects their outcomes. And this is listening, finally. And you see some of the same trends. You see again a jump between second and third year. You see a plateauing effect after third year, right? Sometimes even big drop. But some of the same results. So looking at the results, all skills combined, this is what it looks like, right? So when you eliminate all the noise, this is what you get. So there's some interesting things to notice there. So look at listening. until the very end, listening lags behind the other skills. When we saw that, the first time the first round of testing that we did in 2014, I was kind of surprised because I would have expected listening to be at least as good as speaking, if not better, right? But that's not the case. Why do you think that is? Yes.
It's another question of how the proficiency guidelines are defined.
It could be. It could be.
I mean, I think there's maybe an expectation that the passive skills just aren't going to naturally develop much at a higher rate. And I think they don't if you're not in an immersion situation, right? There's just not the constant sort of background building of that. It's just a classroom learning.
Yeah.
I noticed that for Korean listening, it was really surprisingly high. And that seems a little strange to me. So what are they doing there?
Because they listen to music. Because
So-
listening becomes a major.
So when we saw the first round of results, like I said, I was kind of surprised to see that listening was so low. I mean, even after a year, they're on average at the novice mid level, which is very basic listening. So one of the things that we did at the University of Utah is we did very structured observations of classrooms, right? So I trained a team of graduate students who were native speakers of the different languages to implement a teaching observation scheme. They would go into the classroom, record, transcribe, and then note what was going on in the classroom. And what we saw was that, so when I talked to the language faculty after seeing these results, they were also surprised, and they would say, well, we only use the target language in the classroom, so they're constantly listening to the target language. We don't understand why their listening skills are so low. So when we did the observations and we looked at the results of the observations, the reality is that they're not doing any kind of deep listening. They're doing interpersonal listening, right? Which is highly contextualized. And there are many other aids for comprehension that are not there in a listening test. When you take one of these listening proficiency tests, you listen to someone speaking, and that's all the information that you have. You have no recourse to asking for clarification. There's no visual support. Nothing. It's just audio, and they're not used to that. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but that kind of listening is not happening in our classrooms. It happened in the audiolingual days a long time ago, but it doesn't happen anymore. And you see the results there, because what we're measuring in these proficiency tests in terms of listening is not the type of listening that our students do, even in their first language. I mean, my students don't listen to NPR. I don't know about yours, but mine don't. They watch a YouTube video and they listen to it, but they see the video as well. So there's visual support. And the test is not really measuring that kind of listening. Yes?
I think you're right. I think it may also be linked to the ideology of the paradigms that push for communicative approach, kind of like supports active skills and not passive skills.
Exactly. Yes.
And, having worked with a French program in developing curriculum, I noticed that we spent very little time developing listening activities, if at all.
Yeah.
It's kind of we kind of assume people will pick it up.
So when I had these conversations with the Korean program, and those are my poster children, they were very interested, and they said, "Oh, maybe we need to incorporate more listening activity, be more intentional about how we teach listening," and they did so, and the results are there.
Yeah,
Right?
but I'm also told that the Korean program now is so popular because students are interested in the music produced
Popular
in
culture in
Korea.
general, yeah.
Therefore, the students are already
Yeah.
used to listening,
Right.
listening more than anything else, because that's what attracts
They're
them.
interested in that.
Yeah. So they are constantly practicing
Uh-huh.
that,
Uh-huh.
whereas no matter how much they insist. They don't listen so much to Italian music. I tell them.
We need Gangnam style.
Could you talk a little bit about what you did specifically with the Korean program?
So what they did was they, in their regular assessments that they do with their students, throughout the course of the semester, they made it a point to incorporate a listening section, a passage where students had to listen to something and just listen, and then they would be asked questions about the overall meaning of the passage, specific details, supporting details, the kind of tasks that you have to go through when you take a listening proficiency test. So in a way, they were training them to perform well on a test like this. Again, as I said earlier, I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but the results are there.
Pure audio, not.
Pure audio, correct, yes, yeah.
And why do that? Why aren't you sure with what's your rationale for
Why I'm not sure if it's good or
equalizing
bad.
the skills?
I'm not sure if it's good or bad because I don't know if that is a form of teaching to the test
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
if it is
yeah,
really
yeah.
a skill
that was the other
that
objection.
is useful in real life
Absolutely.
communication and that they will need. Of course they will. And if you're listening to NPR, it's pure listening skills and it's deep listening that you need, right? But they don't do that very often. They don't do that very often. So should we spend time on that? I don't know. That's a different discussion. Okay, so this is an overall view of, again, the cross-sectional data. But we also have longitudinal data. So in some cases, particularly at Michigan State, because the first year at Michigan State they decided to test at the beginning and then at the end of the semester, so they had more cases of students who took multiple tests, and we can look at them and see progression over time. So at Michigan State, they looked at all the students who had taken at least 2 proficiency tests. And looking at the speaking test, the OPI, they found 814 learners in these languages. And they looked at them and saw the progression from testing event to testing event. So of the 814 participants, about 45% of them grew from one test to the next. 40% showed no change, and 15% showed a decrease. And this is what it looks like by language. So the lines, so at the bottom, this is 0, 1, 2, 3 is the testing event. So this is the first time they were tested, second time, third time, fourth time. If you see a line that goes only between 0 and 1, that's because that person took only 2 tests. If the line goes from 0 to 2, that person took, like this one, took 3 tests, 1, 2, and 3. And this person right here took 4 tests, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in Chinese, these are the results. French, Russian, and Spanish. They looked at those 4 languages that were the highest numbers at Michigan State. As you can see, there's growth there overall, right? Over time. So that's good news. Students learn over time. And it's also good news in the sense that it looks like the assessment tool is actually measuring what it's supposed to be measured, which is language growth.
No, those are triangles. I thought they were arrows. I was like, ooh.
Oh, no. They're triangles. Yeah, they're a little misleading. They're triangles.
Yeah, I never see it. No, because it's in the
So this is by language: Chinese, French, Russian, and Spanish. I'm going to show you now a different view of the same data, now by level of proficiency when they took the first test. Okay, so these are the students who were novice low in L when they took test number 1. And these are the ones who were novice mid, the first time they were tested, novice high, intermediate low, intermediate mid, intermediate high, advanced low, advanced mid. Okay. You can safely ignore this one because it's one occurrence only. But in general, this is a trend. So if you look at the overall view, you'll notice that the ones that started at the lower levels made big gains from testing event to testing event. And then as you go higher in proficiency, the line gets a little flatter.
Well, you have more and more who are losing.
Huh?
You have more and more students who are worse.
Well, when you look at the higher levels, notice how the number of lines is very small,
Right.
because there are very few students who started at the very high level and were tested more than once. Typically, if they started at the high level, the first time they were tested, that's because they were about to graduate. They tested once and then they're gone. Right? Very few students who started at advanced low were tested several times.
But in intermediate low and intermediate mid, you have a lot of lines with negative
Yes,
slope.
yes, you do. Yeah.
I think this seems to confirm the basic premise of the actual proficiency scale, which is that to go between the higher levels takes more time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. And it also confirms the fact that it's a testing event and there's going to be a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And there is some level of fatigue on the part of students when they have to take 3 tests, and the third time that they take the 3 tests, they go, whatever, I don't really care. I'm going to click here, click,
Yeah.
and see what happens, right? They don't care because it has no practical effect on their grade or anything, right? So they get tired of it, logically. So there's a certain level of noise there, but in general, it does confirm the notion of the proficiency guidelines, in the sense that as you go higher, the rate of growth slows down. Which we know, I mean, as teachers, we see that all the time, right? With first year students, they get so excited because in 1 year they go from not knowing anything to being able to order from a menu at a restaurant and ask where the bathroom is, right? And things like that. And they get so excited. And then you see them in second year and they come to you and say, we're not learning anything in second year. How come? What's going on? And you have to explain, well, that's the nature of proficiency. You're going higher. No. Okay, so that's reflected there. Okay. So, yeah, we've talked about this. The OPIC measures growth, but with some noise. I'm going to stop here to ask you to think about the results. Is this surprising in any way? Or is this what you would expect? Not what you would expect? No?
I was surprised by the number of negative results. I was ready for slow growth, but I was surprised to see so many negative.
Yeah, well, that's, yeah. But again, keep in mind that.
The motivation of the test takers,
Yeah. That affected the results to some extent. Do you think that students understand the results?
Well, this is what you're saying about intermediate, for example. Is this what you're saying? I mean,
Do they understand how languages are learned and the process of learning a language? No.
some of instructors could understand.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think they do. I think we do a very bad job of explaining it.
Yeah.
I agree.
So they have expectations which, are not met, because they're wrong expectations to begin with.
Yeah, I totally agree. We do an awful, in fact, we don't explain to them what they should expect in terms of language learning. They don't know what the
Or in
process
terms
is.
of learning periods, because that's an even more important message, I would say. So what's the value of learning a language?
Right.
And how many other skills you learn before.
But we do, I would say that at least we try to talk about the value of learning languages, right? And you look at departmental websites, and there's often some kind of mission statement there that talks about the value of learning language. At least we try. I'm not sure the message gets to the students, but at least we try. But in terms of how proficiency works and how it evolves, and the path from lower levels to higher levels, we typically don't talk about that with students. And that's why they get frustrated when they get to second year and they think, I'm not learning anything new. I'm going over the same stuff that I already learned last year. Why? Right? And they get frustrated. So, and a very important piece here, a very important message, lesson is that we need to make sure that students understand where they're going. Because if they don't know what the destination is, how are they going to get there? Right? They need to understand what the destination is and what they need to do in order to get there. What's the route that I need to follow? Because otherwise they're never going to get there. And we forget about that. And it's very important because they don't really know how it works. Okay. I think I mentioned at the beginning that in addition to the proficiency testing that we did, we also gave, or maybe I didn't mention that, I forgot. We also gave the students a fairly significant background questionnaire because we wanted to know more about the students and be able to see if there are factors that correlate with language learning. So I'm going to talk about that briefly, particularly about three things. An overall proficiency of the language majors, which I think is important, the role of previous experience in the language when they come to us, and also the relationship between course grades and proficiency. So as I said, we administered a background questionnaire, all three universities. It took us a while, but we agreed on the kinds of questions that we wanted to ask and how we wanted to ask them. We basically asked about these things. What kind of exposure do they have to the language? What kind of formal education in the language? Have they had any kind of a broad experience? What do they do outside the classroom? How important is language learning for them, and what aspects of language learning are important, and why did they choose to learn the language? So motivation, basically. I said I was going to talk about homework briefly. One of my colleagues was very adamant that we had to include a question about homework in the background questionnaire because he was convinced that the number one factor that determines what level of proficiency they reach is how much time they spend at home doing homework. We included that question. And the answer is there's no correlation between the time they spend doing homework and the level of proficiency. Unfortunately, I know, exactly. It'd be great if we could say to them, we have empirical evidence that if you spend 10 hours a week, no, we have no evidence at all. Anyway, so we asked about these things. And we're still using the information that we collected to look at correlations. So at Michigan State, they looked at the profile of majors. So they looked at 884 students who were declared majors and how they perform when they're about to graduate. In Russian, French, and Spanish, so these are the numbers. The numbers in Russian are not huge, but still significant. Overall, this is what they found, that Spanish majors did best in reading, where they reached 6.49. This is how we convert the scoring. So 6.49 is somewhere between intermediate high and advanced low, which is what we saw when I showed you the overall results, right? So in reading, they're between intermediate high and advanced low. In listening, they're between intermediate mid and intermediate high. In speaking, they're slightly lower at intermediate mid. These are majors. In French, reading is also the strongest skill at 6.2, which is, again, a little above intermediate high. Speaking is 5.8, which is a little below intermediate high. And listening is the weakest at, again, intermediate mid to intermediate high. And in Russian, speaking is the highest, followed by reading and listening. Overall, their level is about one sub-level, or 1.5 below the other two languages. Okay? But one of the things that we saw from the background questionnaire is that the majority of the majors are not language-only majors. This is an interesting difference between the research that I mentioned earlier that John Carroll did in the 60s and what we see now. So back in the 60s, a Russian major was majoring in Russian, and the French major was majoring in French. A French major today is typically a double major in business and French, or engineering and German, or some health-related field and Spanish, right? So the majority of our majors are double majors, what Holowinky and Sugas called hybrid majors. So they wanted to see to what extent not being a language-only major affects your ultimate attainment in terms of proficiency, right? So they looked at the two groups by skill. There are a lot of numbers here, so I'll briefly organize them for you. So at the top, these are the hybrid majors, and these are the language-only majors, by language, French, Russian, and Spanish. And these are the numbers that reached each level of proficiency: superior, advanced high, mid-low, intermediate high, mid-low, novice high, mid-low. Okay? So as you can see, the hybrid majors, the majority of them are around here. You know, in the intermediate low to intermediate high range. Mostly intermediate mid. And the language-only majors tend to be slightly higher but similar. Notice the difference in numbers. There are 759 double majors compared to only 125 language-only majors. Of the language-only majors, 32% reached at least the advanced low level, but only 15% of the hybrid majors. So there seems to be a difference between the two groups. This is in speaking. Now look at listening. Basically the same thing. Language only, 46% reach the advanced level. Hybrid majors, about half, only 26% reach that level. And see, there's only one student in Spanish and one in Spanish in this group that reached the superior level, and very few advanced high. The majority are still there in the intermediate mid to advanced low range. So now look at reading. Look at reading now. Interestingly, the language-only majors are not doing better than the hybrid majors. The hybrid majors are more likely to reach the advanced level than the language-only majors. Why could that be?
More experienced readers.
Huh? More experienced readers?
They have to read.
It could be that these are two different populations, and that the double majors tend to be academically better in general, and that shows in their reading skills. Huh?
Less tense, almost less preoccupied with the language, and just eager to give results.
These guys, you mean?
Yeah.
And that may have a positive effect on their results.
Like
More relaxed.
More relaxed.
More relaxed, and therefore more able to tap on other resources, which are
It could be.
overall. Whereas the others are more concerned with the language and waste time in understanding everything. I don't know.
It could be.
Maybe
I
they are
think it's the application part of it, because they have to apply it in certain field they're in, so that gives them a little more sense of performance and application.
Yeah. I think that's likely that they're different populations in some form. Yes.
Are they registering in the same courses? Or are there courses that are specifically designed for people who want to take language for specific purposes, for example? In which case the motivation would come in very strongly.
Yeah, that could be too. So all three universities have programs that give you a certain degree of flexibility in terms of the courses that you take, electives, and it may be that the hybrid majors take different electives from the full majors. Could be. I have another theory that, and it's just as likely or unlikely as any other to be true, that because of the nature of the curriculum, particularly at the higher levels, both groups of students get enough exposure to reading in the classroom. They may not get enough exposure to speaking and listening, right? So if you're a major and logically interested in doing well in your language, and you don't feel that you're getting enough exposure to speaking and listening in the classroom, you're likely to find other opportunities to speak and listen in the target language. Language-only majors probably have more time to work on their language skills outside the classroom than double majors, who tend to be busier. Language-only majors have more flexibility to study abroad than double majors, who have less flexibility in their schedules and therefore can't always afford to spend a semester in Germany. So that may affect your listening and reading, but not speaking, but not necessarily your reading, because there's a lot of reading going on in the courses that you're taking on campus already, and the two groups may be getting similar exposure to reading in the classroom, but they may be doing other things outside the classroom that are different that may affect their speaking and listening. I don't know. Yes.
I have my own theory. Just
Okay,
kind of
go ahead.
A variation on your different student population. If you're a language-only major, then you are saying to yourself, I'm doing a classical liberal arts education. I'm reading a lot of, Plato and whatnot. If you're a hybrid major, you're saying, I'm taking this language for an applied purpose. I'm going to use this to do X.
Yeah.
And so you may just on your own say, well, I'm taking Spanish or taking Russian so that I can read it for this specific reason. So you may practice that more.
I agree with you in how you characterize the two different populations, but I would say the ones that say, I'm doing a traditional liberal arts degree, I would think those would be the ones who would be more interested in reading.
Yeah.
And I would expect those students to do better in reading than the other group, but it's the opposite.
Could it be that a lot of times instructors of upper level language courses are forced to teach those, or upper level reading courses are forced to teach those classes in English to get enough students to take them? And so,
Good point. It could be. And in fact, in several of these languages at these institutions, that is the case, that upper level courses are taught in English. But that's not the case in French and Spanish. It is the case in Russian, at least in some courses, but not in French and Spanish.
How does all this correlate with the listening we observed in the first and second slides? Listening not improving so much, whereas here it was recorded as improving. I might be just
This, you mean?
confused. Yes.
Yeah, so listening, when we looked at the first slides, remember that listening lags behind at the lower levels and then it slowly catches up. And these are students at the end.
Okay.
These are students at the end of the program.
Yes.
So at this point, listening has caught up with speaking. So interesting findings that may have a variety of possible explanations. I don't have the answers to many of these questions, but that's why I find them fascinating, because we can hypothesize about what may be going on, right? Okay. Yeah, we already asked those questions. So the other thing looking at these results, we thought, what is it about the majors other than their academic exposure to courses on campus? What is it about them that may affect their level of proficiency? What other factors may affect their level of proficiency? So we went back to the background questionnaire and we looked at possible correlating predictors. And this is again some of the work that Michigan State did. So they found 3 types of predictors that seem to correlate with language proficiency. study abroad, heritage status, and motivation. So study abroad seems to correlate positively with reading and speaking. So students who go abroad seem to do better in reading and speaking. The reading part is kind of surprising to me.
Yeah.
Heritage level correlates with listening and speaking, which makes sense, makes logical sense, right? And then the last three are motivational questions. So there was a question that asked, are you learning this language for fun? And those who said yes, that answer correlates positively with their reading and listening proficiency. Makes sense, I would say. Those who said that they're learning the language for travel seem to do better in listening and speaking. Again, it makes sense, practical, communicative interaction. But here's an interesting finding. There was one factor that had a negative correlation with proficiency, and that's taking the language to satisfy a requirement. So when students said, I'm taking this language to satisfy a requirement, that's my motivation, that had a negative correlation with their reading ability. Okay, so that tells you something about language requirements. Are they good or bad? Do we need a language requirement, or is it actually working against us? Because the students who are there because they have to be are really not getting what they want to get.
Make a comment about the study abroad and reading and speaking.
Yes.
I know that there is data in the Russian language research database that study abroad, the higher the level of reading proficiency before the study abroad, the bigger the gain in speaking is.
Yeah.
So the pre-study abroad level of reading proficiency is a strong predictor for the gain in speaking.
Yeah.
And so that might be a reflection of
Yeah.
that.
One of the things that we are trying to look at is the correlation between the skills. So is there a certain level of reading proficiency that you need in order to get to a certain level of speaking proficiency, for example? And are you able to reach an advanced level of speaking if your reading is only intermediate, for example? Or does it help when your reading is higher to reach a higher level of speaking?
Because without reading you can get
Right.
there.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question that we haven't been able to answer yet, but we're looking at that. Yes.
I want to go back to language requirement. We know that one of the things that colors your perception of the value of language, whether you're in the general public or whether you're in the administrative side of the university, is your own personal experience with learning the language or not.
Yeah.
If you've had a bad experience, you tend to see it in a very negative light.
Negative. Yes.
So I think it behooves us as a language community to try to see whether we need to balance out short-term gains in terms of bodies in the classroom
Yeah.
with long-term possible damage that we're doing.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons why fewer and fewer Americans are learning a language is largely, one of the reasons is because they don't see the value of doing it. And they certainly haven't been taught the value of that. Just throwing that out there. You know, and trying to get a captive audience, you know, may help us right now. In the long term, it may actually be strangling us.
So one of the things that when you look at these last three, and they all are trying to get at the motivational piece of language learning, these two are forms of intrinsic motivation, and this one is a form of extrinsic motivation. And what we see is that when you flip that switch from extrinsic to intrinsic, it has a positive effect, as opposed to a negative effect. So at the University of Utah years ago, a colleague and I tried to convince the language programs to start counting the second year courses towards the minor or the major. And the argument was, if you have the students taking a course that they have to take as a requirement, they're going to see it that way. They're going to see it as, I'm here because I have to be, I don't want to be here, I'm not motivated, it's actually going to affect my learning negatively. But if you tell them you're already taking a course that's going to count towards a minor or a major, that may switch their perception. And that may do the trick of switching from a negative extrinsic motivation to a positive intrinsic one, right? Of course, we didn't get anywhere with that because the language programs did not want to count second year language towards a minor or a major. But, that may be something worth exploring.
Actually, we had tried that at Cornell and it worked.
It was.
So the second year counted for the 200 level courses that were counted for your major.
Yeah.
So that worked, yeah.
Yeah.
But then, of course, they changed it now, so it's a different
So
story.
now it doesn't.
So that was years ago.
Okay.
But it does work.
Yeah.
Because, your 200 levels, so 100 level courses are intro, basically. 200 levels will count towards your major. Yeah,
Why not?
as elective.
Why not? Yeah.
And the third year also
Yeah, of
counts.
course. Anything after a second.
I don't want to flog a dead horse here, but I've been doing work looking at the MLA enrollment figures, which are national averages. They tell a story, but that story needs to be balanced out by specific stories at specific schools, which may tell different stories.
Yeah.
And if you look at a number of schools that do not have a language requirement, for example, Carnegie Mellon, their story does not fit the declining narrative. They're actually growing. So one, we should ask ourselves, why is that?
Yeah.
And I don't know if the answer is because they don't have a language requirement, but that is certainly one thing that we should look at.
Yeah. Of course, what people look back at historical MLA data, and the highest percentages of university students taking foreign languages happened in the United States back in the 60s, where everybody had a language requirement. And often the language requirements were longer than they are now. And then at some point in the late 60s, many universities decided to drop their language requirements, and the percentage of students taking foreign languages fell. So that works against us because people say, oh, but if we cut the language requirement, we're going to lose all our students, right? Is that true or not? And maybe we will lose some, but maybe the ones that we'll keep are the ones that we want to keep. Because the reality now is that we have a lot of students in first and second year, and very few beyond that. Is that what we want? Okay. So, yeah, we've talked about all of this. How are we doing? 4:30. Should I stop here and I can go on, or if you want?
Early exposure.
Okay, early exposure. That's interesting. So here's another thing. One of the findings in the original study that I mentioned by Carol was that early exposure has a strong effect on ultimate level proficiency, right? So that students who start in the K-12 world typically do better. So at Minnesota, they looked at that, and they tested students in French, German, and Spanish, or looked at the test results of students in French, German, and Spanish at the end of their language requirement, which is the 4th semester course. And they looked at whether they had come to the university with previous exposure to the language or not. So these are the numbers. They had 71 students in first semester who were admitted in the first semester, 50 who were placed into second semester, 96 who were placed into third semester, 23 placed into fourth semester. So a total of 240 students, all tested at the end of the fourth semester course. Okay, so these are all fourth semester students. Some of them started at the University of Minnesota and did 4 semesters there. Some did 3 semesters, some did 2, some did 1 only because they were placed there. Is that clear? The ones who were placed in fourth semester, on average, had 4.5 years of previous experience. The ones who started in third semester, 3.8, and 2.5, 0.7. Okay? This is how they did in listening, speaking, and reading. So again, these are all students who were tested at the end of this 1004 course, which is a fourth semester course. The ones who started in 1001, first semester, these are their results. These are the ones who started in second semester, third semester, fourth semester. And the average number of years of high school or middle school language that they brought with them. So what you see is that the more experience they had previously, the better their results. Okay, so they're scoring significantly higher. These guys are scoring significantly higher. They're all in the same course. They're all in the fourth semester course. But these guys are doing significantly better, and they happen to have over 4 years of previous experience. And these guys that learned all their language at the university, going through the university program, are significantly lower in proficiency than the others. Okay? It's an interesting finding. So when they looked at their sixth semester, so students who continue, who go on and get a minor or major in the program, they created this kind of infographic that shows you who they are in their sixth semester course, which is a course that already counts towards the major or the minor. And in blue, you have students who came with no experience. So only one blue circle continues on to the minor or the major. In green, 1 or 2 years, only one. In yellow, 2 to 3 years, only one. And the majority of them in French have 5+ years of previous experience, or between 3 and 5. And the same is true in Spanish. These guys are almost non-existent. So, who are the students who populate our major and minor programs? The ones who studied the language in high school and came to us with already a significant level of proficiency, not the ones that go through our first and second year courses. So in reality, we're serving two different populations. In first and second year, we're serving the students who are there because they have to be there to satisfy a language requirement. And beyond that, we're serving students that we haven't seen before, that came to us and went into the major or minor. So this may be different for you guys because your student population is different from ours. But for us, what this means is that we have to work very closely with the secondary schools to recruit and to make sure that students in French, Spanish, Chinese, Russian programs in the high school understand that there are opportunities for them if they come to the university and they can do something with their language proficiency. Okay.
Any data like this for lactose?
Because they're not typically taught in the high schools, there's very little. Very little. So the students that we tested in the less commonly taught languages typically started at the university. Yeah, there are very few schools that teach Korean, if any. Right? Yes.
Are we starting to develop this kind of work with Chinese, which is starting to appear in the secondary school at a larger and larger rate,
Yeah.
higher and higher rate?
Yeah. So the state of Utah has the largest dual language immersion program in the country, all in public schools. So we have hundreds of schools in which students starting in first grade learn 50% of the day in English and 50% in another language. We have Spanish, French, Chinese, Russian, Portuguese, and German. And those students, when they complete the program, in 10th grade, they already have access to advanced courses at the university level taught in the target language. So they're still in the high school, but they're already taking advanced level courses at the university. So we give them a pathway from elementary education to university in the language. And those are the students who will be populating our advanced level courses, not the ones that we teach in first and second year. Yes.
Can you go back to the previous, for that one? One way of seeing this data could say that the language programs at the university are not teaching, are not teaching the necessary abilities for the students to succeed. So it's also like improving the language programs at the university levels to bring the students to do better.
Yeah, there are many ways to interpret the data. That's one. Another way to interpret this is that we're not doing a good job of placing students when they come to the university. Right? I don't know if you guys use placement tests. Yeah. So placement tests are notoriously bad in terms of their ability to predict where students should be, and that shows there too. And then another alternative explanation is that 2.5 years of study in high school are more than 1 semester in college, right? So the students who were placed in second semester came with 2.5 years of previous experience. Is that equivalent to 1 semester of college experience? It seems to be more. So they're not placed where they should be. You know? So that's another possible explanation. There are many ways to look at the data, and I agree with you. One of them is to say maybe we're not doing what we should be doing at the university level. We're not giving them the skills that they get from somewhere else.
You say it again, I didn't quite understand. So do we place them lower or higher?
Lower.
We place them lower, that's why their gains, at this high.
Exactly.
Yeah, they could have
But-
performed better.
Yeah. Or we place them based on different criteria that are not necessarily proficiency based.
Or there's another potential explanation, we don't do any oral testing when we place.
We don't.
Students sometimes,
I-
well, some programs do, but most programs do not.
Most programs don't.
And
Because if they
some students may willfully
place lower.
place themselves lower
Yes.
because grades are important.
They do, we know that for a fact. Yes.
Well, yes, but in those cases, during the first 2 weeks of the semester, while the students are shopping for the classes, it is our job to assess students and redirect them and put them, move them higher if it needs or move them lower if need be.
Right, of course.
But the placement test only goes so far.
Exactly,
And then
exactly.
the first classes of the
It's our job
semester,
to,
we're the ones
Yes.
who are supposed to gauge all these skills and tell them, okay, you're not at the right level, you should move.
of course, that puts a lot of responsibility on the instructor, and some people are willing to do that, other people say that's not my job. And also, it depends on the student's willingness to show what they can do. And sometimes they, just like they place themselves lower, they may pretend that they don't speak the language well enough. We've had, one of my colleagues who teaches Russian at the University of Utah has all kinds of anecdotes of native speakers of Russian who come to her and say, but I don't really speak the language. Like, really? You're a native speaker. Yes.
Do you have any data about correlations with AP exam results?
We don't, because we didn't collect that, but I've been involved with AP for many years, and I know that there are no standardized practices across the board. So some schools will say if you get a 5 in AP, we'll give you 2 years of language. Others say we'll give you 1 semester. Others say we'll give you up to 3rd year. So there's a lot of variation across the board. And again, we don't always assess the same kinds of abilities that the AP exam assesses. So it's hard to
AP is also just written, right?
Huh?
AP is just written, right?
No, there's writing, speaking, and listening and reading, all 4. Yeah. But and it doesn't exist in all languages, of course. Yeah, it's limited in terms of the languages that are covered. I think I'm going to stop there because otherwise I'm going to put you all to sleep. I have a lot more, but I'll stop there and see if there are any other questions or issues that we would like to talk about. Yes.
Riley, you present a lot of data. How often, in your experience, have curricular, programmatic, institutional decisions been made that were driven by data?
Not very often. Unfortunately, not very often. In fact, so one of our tasks was to go back to language programs with the data every year after we completed the testing and show the data to them. And there was, in some cases, some very obvious resistance to the story that the data tell. So often languages or language faculty in general are not willing to listen to the data. And people will say, well, but that's only measuring one thing. That's only measuring proficiency, and there are many other things that we do. Okay, sure, but if this is one thing. This is what we're talking about, proficiency. I'm not talking about other things, just this. But they don't want to listen to it. Some do. As I said, Korean was very, at our institution, Korean was very open to listening to the data and making adjustments based on the data, and they did that, and it worked for them. But other languages that don't see themselves, that they're more, other languages are more comfortable in their own position, and they don't see any reason why they should be listening to anyone telling them how they should change what they do. Yes.
I wanted to return to a topic that we discussed near the middle of our time together, which was that how students view their own language learning. And over the last 2 years, I was helping with a research project that was assessing students of less commonly taught languages as they who participate in the Shared Course Initiative, which is the program that I help with. And we did OPIs, over the phone OPIs with them. And I was in charge of helping Columbia students, get seated and call in, and then afterwards, there were sometimes a little, in a sort of heightened emotional state. And so I'd talk about them and talk with them about what they just did, and I would show them, the actual proficiency scale and show them a link to the can-do statements. And they reported that this was something they'd never learned about before, never done, and were very interested in and fascinated by this kind of metacognition about language learning. And, I don't have any data on this, it's just a purely anecdotal thing, but I wonder if there's any, if you know of any indication, either negatively or positively or neutrally, if engaging students in this kind of meta thinking about their language learning has a positive effect on any aspect of it.
I think it has a very positive effect. The University of Minnesota, partly related to this project, but it really started before this project, has a very well-developed self-assessment protocol that they use in all their language courses. It's a very robust tool. It's technology-mediated and led by the teacher. So the teacher uses a full session, class session, to take the students through a self-assessment process in which they work with can-do statements, they audio record themselves in the language, they have a conversation with a classmate, then they reflect upon their own performance in the language, looking at the can-do statements, they fill out a form, and then they looked at the correlation between that, the results of that self-assessment and the proficiency testing to see how well students understand language proficiency and how well they place themselves. And there's a pretty good correlation between the two. So what we know is that if you teach them how to talk about and think about language proficiency, they're able to do that fairly well, and that helps them understand the process. What I mentioned earlier, that helps them understand where they're going and what they need to do to get there, which is always positive. Anything else? Thank you.